probably on TikTok. Union Square is called Union Square not because of the Civil War. I just thought they named a bunch of shit in New York after the Union, like Union Street in Brooklyn. But apparently, Union Square is actually called Union Square because it's where Bowery and Broadway meet. Bowery kind of turns into 4th Avenue here, and it connects with Broadway at Union Square. So the more you know, the more you grow. I mean, it's interesting because well, there was a series of videos I was watching about the history of Broadway and the true kind of like roots of Broadway, the origins of Broadway. The common knowledge is that it's a Lenape, or it's a Native American indigenous people's kind of trail that they just sort of codified into a road, but I guess that's not actually true. It was the Boston Post Road, I guess. The road from downtown, which actually was New York City and New Amsterdam, up to Boston, I guess. And then when they laid out the grid, the original grid plan did not have Broadway. It actually just had, it didn't have Central Park either. It just had a grid. It had kind of a big park, not nearly as big as Central Park, probably about a park about the quarter of the size of Central Park, called The Parade. It was going to be a park called The Parade, and it was going to start around 34th Street, and then just fucking grid, baby. But, you know, the reason why I bring this up is because the people who were planning at the time, the city planners, the rich, you know, kind of fat cats who were making all the decisions, had the foresight to understand that keeping Broadway, and in fact extending Broadway all the way up the island, made it more interesting. Gave it these kind of spaces. I guess, you know, Times Square, Union Square, Madison Square, it was just luck. You know, it was luck that Broadway ran into Central Park at 59th Street at Columbus Circle. Even though it fits the city so well, these are the kind of sites. I'm like recapping a fucking TikTok video. Well, I guess my point is, I feel like a lot of modern design doesn't take into account those kind of idiosyncrasies. You know, it's in fact, it's like the eccentricities and kind of the ways that things are kind of oblong, I think a lot of times that makes them actually more interesting to live in. You know, think if it was just grid plan all the fucking way up. You know, the design of nature is like so fractal, it's so much more complicated and kind of beautiful than a grid plan. It's this kind of, you know, interlocking, swirling diagonals and all these kind of, you know, the crenellations and the kind of nooks and crannies and stuff. That a lot of time that's where the bacteria can kind of take place, get funky, get strong, make something interesting happen, right? Like the West Village, of course, being the most obvious example of the streets that are just kind of planned by human intuition. Your feet, they're wish trails, basically, right? Is Broadway a wish trail? Broadway's kind of a wish trail. A wish trail is anywhere there's like a natural path that is formed because so many people have just started walking that way and it's not paved. They try to get you to walk some other way, but then the wish trail kind of reveals the way that people actually want to go. So that's your little history in a minute. New York City psychogeography, tracing the psychogeographies. The other thing that's occurred to me recently, and the main thing I want to talk about is Edward Burns films. That's why I got on. This is an emergency broadcast. I have to talk about these Edward Burns films before it's too late. I'm such a, you know, it has, the timing has to be right for this stuff. And I should have done it yesterday. I should have just done it yesterday, but I was trying to rest. Anytime I like try to force myself to rest, it backfires. What are all these people here for? Claro. So yeah, the other thing that's occurred to me, because it was 9/11 1 week ago, now it's 9/18. The thing that has occurred to me is, I've lived in New York City since 2010, but it's just now kind of sinking in, and like the reality of like 9/11 happened here. And like that's fucking intense and scary as hell, actually. I think we are just like so fucking traumatized collectively by it. That's what all this superhero shit is about. That's why all these fucking superhero movies, because people are so fucking traumatized. And I think we're still traumatized. I think we're kind of in denial. This is what I'm saying. It's like I think we're kind of in denial. All the people that kind of rushed in to move into this kind of gentrified New York City, do they really understand? A few years ago, I turned off the chat, by the way. I turned off the chat because I have so much to say about Edward Burns films. A few years ago, I went on a brief, an extremely short-lived Hinge date with this girl who worked in the Freedom Tower. She worked in the fucking Freedom Tower, pretty high up somewhere. And she said something about certain days when you would work, they were so high up that the entire floor would get encircled in clouds and you couldn't see anything. She worked so high off the ground. And, did those fucking buildings really need to be that tall? And they put a fucking restaurant on the top and shit. That kind of, I don't know, 9/11 just knocked us into this kind of safety world of extreme carefulness. And, when they built those things, it's like apparently the people who worked on the higher floors would get seasick and shit because there was so much sway in the building. And the elevators couldn't even go that high. They had like a sky lobby. You'd have to take an elevator like 70 floors and then get out at the sky lobby and take another fucking elevator. Try to sit here, see how long this lasts. And I think that's just like one of the most traumatic, kind of gory details is just like the falling man, the people that jumped. And so I've been reliving all of that for the last week. And, 9/11 was such a spectacle. It was such a situationist thing in a way. It was attack on office buildings and kind of like cubicles, Xerox. The Edward Burns films, I've kind of, he was somebody that I liked a lot when I was younger, like in college. He was an example for me of somebody who made an independent film for a low budget, got it into Sundance, blah, blah, blah. And, but now he's got this whole body of work, right? Like, I haven't really watched any of his films probably in, 15 years or something. But watching the Nancy Holofcener, whatever her name is, movies, watching the Tamara Jenkins movies, The Savages, watching the Todd Solondz movies has kind of put me in the mood for these kind of like these kind of like New York filmmakers that make kind of human stories. I don't know if you'd say they're melodramatic, but their cinematic style is kind of like simple, plain, one shot, not a lot of editing, but it's like kind of these urbane, literary almost. And so I kind of had, we were watching those Nicole Holofcener movies, Enough Said, and what else did we watch? There was something where I was just sort of like, this kind of reminds me of Edward Burns. He's got kind of a similar career, and he's somebody that like he's had a nice kind of like Hollywood body of work. Like he's in Saving Private Ryan, and he's made all these kind of TV shows and shit. but he's also not really, people don't talk about him like at all that I can, as like a great filmmaker. He's not really discussed on the level of somebody like Linklater or certainly not Wes Anderson or P.T. Anderson. And so his work is sort of more like these kind of rom-coms or like chick flick. And so he's like the bro Hal Hartley. He's like the bro, Todd Solondz. But watching his films, we watched Sidewalks of New York, Newlyweds, Groomsmen, what else? He's made a bunch of fucking movies since I was watching his movies in 2005 or whatever. And his movies are almost, then we watched this one, Summer Days, Summer Nights. His movies are almost like, they almost seem like, that was kind of how we commemorated 9/11. We watched Edward Burns films because he shoots New York. He lives, I think, in Tribeca. He's shooting down there constantly. This movie, Sidewalks in New York, it's like Soho, Tribeca, West Village. He really shoots downtown New York and kind of the region. He's from Long Island, so it's Long Island coded. It's sort of like that Greg Mottola movie, The Day Trippers. Sort of has a Edward Burns feel. It's another Soho movie, but his movies feel like they could be about characters who died on 9/11. They kind of, there's this Irish kind of like sadness in his movies. He's got an accent, right? He's like a real New Yorker, but he's this kind of Irish New Yorker, right? So he's kind of one of the New York kind of immigrant, kind of generational archetypes. There's Irish, there's Italian, there's Chinese, there's West African, there's German, there's these kind of waves, Puerto Rican, of New York kind of archetypes. And after living in New York for a while, there's more things in his movies that kind of make sense because they're so specific to this place. And obviously I would say his two biggest influences and the people that he's sort of copying, I guess, and he kind of admitted this, is Woody Allen, probably most obviously. His movies are all kind of like Husbands and Wives or, the early 90s kind of Woody Allen. Like, every Edward Burns movie is kind of the same, where they're just about Catholic guilt about cheating on your spouse. Just like Woody Allen movies. Every movie about middle-aged people, suddenly it just becomes about cheating on your spouse. Like, that's the most interesting thing. That's like the moral dilemma. Eric Romer movies, right, are like that. Every fucking movie's like, oh, should I have sex with this person? Or somebody wants to have sex with some person that's not there. So like Edward, and then he mentioned Truffaut as the other kind of big influence on Edward Burns kind of films. And I can definitely see that. I mean, I think his strength is like he's good with characters. He's good at little details. He's got a good sense of humor, but it's like this Irish kind of sarcastic. It's representation for, Irish Catholic male literary types. Edward Burns is like kind of the niche. I'm kind of surprised he's not more popular. I mean, like I said, he never really made like some kind of virtuoso film like, Boogie Nights or something. I don't even necessarily think he's like, does any Edward Burns movie even have a fucking like montage in it, really? Like, he's not necessarily the most cinematic director. His gospel is kind of like this low budget thing. And this is why in watching his movies now and looking back on my movies, it's like a lot of my movies were sort of like ripping off Edward Burns in a lot of ways, or at least I think I was using his portrayal of how adults like related as like because I was 20 or 21 or whatever when I was writing this stuff. I don't really know how adults actually, you know, conducted relationships like I do now. So watching Edward Burns' film, I think I was just kind of regurgitating. He just gets hot people. He just gets the hottest people he can. You know, get the hottest actors he can. Get Heather Graham and, you know, Jennifer Aniston and Amanda Peet and Stanley Tucci. Stanley Tucci, of course. Rosario Dawson. I mean, Edward Burns is super handsome. He's a super good-looking guy. But I remember seeing She's the One on Comedy Central. They used to play it on Comedy Central a lot when I was a kid in the 90s and sort of early 2000s. And which was a very hip choice for, you know, at that time it felt like Edward Burns might still be some kind of phenom director or something. And, you know, why isn't he? Why isn't he the American, or why isn't he Noah Baumbach, right? Why is Edward Burns kind of in this ghetto of like he's kind of like Tyler Perry, I guess. He said I think he was in a Tyler Perry movie. I think he kind of makes these like ethnic kind of sub genres of like he makes like Irish, New York, Woody Allen movies. But the one I remember seeing Sidewalks of New York when I was in college, I think, or high school. And I think it bombed. I think he said something about how it was a major bomb. And I didn't really like it that much at the time because I just thought, well, this is just like a husbands and wives kind of rehash. You know, there wasn't really anything to like set it apart. She's the One is a very funny movie. It's like the guy who plays his brother. I don't know what that actor's name is. It's a very good portrait of like brothers. It reminded me of me and my brother, Irish, like I said, sarcastic, kind of the way that you relate. It's this kind of like, you know, sarcastic, you know, insult kind of thing or something, kind of fake fighting, cantankerous. I think that stuff is really funny for some reason, you know. And that guy who we got to play his brother, I don't know what his name is, but he's like the ultimate. He's like the Luke Wilson of the Edward Burns films. When Edward Burns stopped casting that guy and started using like famous people, this movie's kind of like lost something. Because that guy was so good as his brother. They looked the same. There's like a Fraser and Niles thing. John Mahoney plays their dad. It was. That movie came out like in 96 or something. Jennifer Aniston's in it, so it's like Cameron Diaz is in it. They were like rising stars at the time. You know, that was the heyday of like indie films, Sundance. Sell your movie at Sundance, you know, they'll finance your next project. Kevin Smith, you know, Tarantino, whatever. Wes Anderson. And this is another thing I wanted to talk about, how I feel like all of that energy went into prestige television. You know, all of the people who made prestige television shows wanted to be independent film directors. You know, Matt Weiner, David Chase, I think The Sopranos, he originally wanted to do a film that was like about a mobster and his shrink. And then they did Analyze This, and he thought, okay, well, but it sort of just turned into a TV show, right? And I want to talk more about that because of the economic factors and the kind of market factors and the change. But Edward Burns, okay, so when I was in college, you know, I'd go to half-price books. I was constantly trying to get books about filmmaking, read about filmmaking, you know, fucking scripts, David Mamet on directing film, Truffaut books, fucking Truffaut criticism, Andre Bazin, books about Orson Welles, Coen Brothers fucking scripts. And one of the books that I got was 3 screenplays by Edward Burns. It had She's the One, Brothers McMullen, which was his first movie. How Irish is that? The Brothers McMullen. And then No Looking Back. He's not great at titles, I would say. He kind of just, you know, his titles are kind of late. I don't know. I like Edward Burns a lot. I think he could do better. You know, I think that there's real talent there that he's not necessarily tapping into. Like, I do think he's a good writer. I think he sees character. I think one reason why he uses that Woody Allen device of like showing sort of pseudo-documentary style kind of interiors of like domestic melodrama, you know, marriages that are falling apart, people that are cheating on each other, whatever it is. And then he'll do like on the street kind of talking head interviews, right, where the characters will sort of extrapolate on their interior motivations, which, you know, to be honest, when he was doing it, you know, not everybody was doing there was no single camera really, like sitcom thing. There was no Office, there was no Parks and Rec, there was none of that like fake documentary NBC comedy thing. But to me, it's like, that's his way of showing the inner thoughts of his characters, right? He shows you the scene, like the objective sort of truth of what's happening. Then he interviews the characters as a way of kind of, you know, unpacking what's going through their heads. Like a novelist. You know, to me, Edward Burns is like, almost like Pete Hamill or something. He's like a regional kind of novelist. He tells these New York stories. Long Island, moved into the city. People who work on Wall Street, like the guy in She's the One works on Wall Street. You know, these are real New York characters, waitresses. And so this book, 3 screenplays by Edward Burns, the introduction to it, he talks about the process of like how to make a no-budget film. This is what he did. He worked at Entertainment Tonight as a PA, and you know, a big aspect of his work is that it's blue collar and that it's working class. You know, these characters, they're cops, like it's a classic New York story. Irish cop father, and the kids are just like, you know, drinking beer, drinking Budweiser, fishing, hanging out in dive bars. You know, it really reminded me when I first came to New York, reading at Dorian Gray, there were all these Irish bars everywhere. You know, there still are, but there was more. There was more, you know, New York is a very Irish city. You know, obviously it's an international city. It belongs to everybody, and there's a lot of cultures that deservedly lay claim to New York. But Irish is a big part of that, as much a big part of that as anything. And it's so far in the past, those people have migrated onward so long ago that I think it kind of gets buried. You know, there's these layers, decade by decade, of kind of the reverberations of the generations that kind of came into New York. You know, the Irish, the German, the Italian, the Puerto Rican, you know. And so his stuff kind of it has that kind of like, I don't know, there's still that kind of raggedy, drunk, wild, real Irish, you know, real feral. You know, I saw a TikTok about there is a difference between like people on the East Coast and people like in the middle of the country, like ethnically. Like if you meet Italians from the East Coast and Italians from like Ohio, they're very different because of the way that the kind of breeding has gone down. And so the East Coast, you see a little bit more of this kind of wild, I don't know, animal energy or something. You see a little bit more of kind of like a rough around the edges Irish, you know, St. Patrick's Cathedral and Father fucking Cardinal O'Connor or whatever. You know, there's kind of layers that are way, way in there. Ed Sullivan is somebody I've been thinking about recently. You know, the Ed Sullivan Show. Somebody said Ed Sullivan's talent was nothing, but he did it better than anybody else on TV. He did nothing better than anybody else on TV. I think Alan King said that. As a host, you know, Ed Sullivan's kind of the ultimate host. He had this variety show, right? He put the comedians, music, and he was, you know, plays, musicals, scenes from fucking plays, you know, cabaret, kind of circus act shit. It was a total variety show, the best of the best. And he would tap into a lot of subcultures and stuff. He would get new things, you know, whatever the new hottest thing was. And so, you know, open mic is sort of like that in a way. It's sort of like an amateur version of that. But he's an Irish, you know, kind of New York figure, Ed Sullivan, right? Yeah, and so these Edward Burns, this book, 3 screenplays by Edward Burns. He just talks all about how, I think he estimated it cost him $25,000 for his first movie. And so him and his dad wrote up like some kind of stock bond thing where they were going to sell $5,000 shares to his friends, or they were just going to find whoever they could, rich people, bankers. And he said they sold one share to one of his dad's friends who was a lawyer, and then he did the rest through like credit cards. He just paid for it on fucking credit cards, which a lot of people, there was more of a culture of that in the early 90s, where it's like Robert Rodriguez made El Mariachi. He had a book about it. I forget what it was called. I forget what but he basically just broke down. I think on El Mariachi, it's like something crazy. Like basically they used everything they shot. But it was a different world, like when I was coming up wanting to be a filmmaker, that was what you had to do. You had to shoot on fucking film. You had to develop film, edit it. There wasn't a lot of digital. There was digital, but I mean, now it's a completely different world as far as anybody can make a film that's comparable to like a Brothers McMullen now for free, basically, Back then, for film stock, develop whatever, it cost thousands of dollars to do that. He said he shot a lot of it with like loose ends. Somebody gave him some loose ends from something. And, he just broke down and it even affected his writing process. I mean, that guy would not write scenes that he couldn't film. Like Edward Burns, he thought, what are the locations I can get for free? My friend's apartments, whatever that might be, his parents' house, the streets of New York, and so that's what he wrote. And, he broke it down. He said, he basically wrote 4 short films and combined them into one feature because if any of his actors dropped out, because, he was making it for nothing, so it was like the actors, there was no guarantee that they would stay. And so if any of the actors just decided they didn't want to show up anymore, he said, he wanted it so he could just cut and just make it, a short film if he had to. And so that stuff definitely all influenced me hugely when I was starting out. And I mean, even now, I don't really hear people talking about that, trying to do things on a budget, how to make a film on a budget. Making a film about blue collar characters, or that was he's kind of a Springsteen guy. You can tell Edward Burns, he's like Gen X. He came up in the 70s. He loves that kind of energy, that kind of Tom Petty does the soundtrack of one of his movies. Fucking Sidewalks of New York. It's got a mostly Cake score. The band Cake. I don't know if people remember the band Cake. I did want to just talk about the band Cake for a second. The band Cake is one of those things, like a lot of things that I like, but their fans kind of ruin it for me, because their fans are think there's Cake is great. They have a very interesting sound, or Rush is like that for me, or ELO, or South Park. It's this is good. I like this, but it's the fans are so psychotic about it that it's just ugh. I can't like ELO, or I can't like fucking Rush because their fans are so fucking annoying about it and think Rush is just the greatest thing that ever happens. Rush is cool. Most prog rock is like that for me. Yes. It's I like this, but it's the fans are just ruining it. And so Cake is like that for me, where it's Cake is cool, but they're sort of kind of overrated in a way. They're interesting, but they're kind of corny. Their sound's a little bit too finished for me, and it's kind of monochromatic. The dude has a monotone singing voice, which is interesting, but it just kind of gets old. Every band in the 90s had a fucking trumpet in it for some reason, Neutral Milk Hotel. It was right before digital took over everything, and so people still had musical instruments from high school laying around, trumpets, trombones. We had to start ska bands in the 90s. That was the only thing we could do. There was no Pro Tools, Logic, mashup culture. It was all get you and 8 of your friends to form a horn section, and your Mighty Mighty Boss Tones or Real Big Fish, or just throw a fucking trumpet player into Cake for some reason. We need a trumpet in this. We need a trumpet in Neutral Milk Hotel. It gives it kind of a Gabriel kind of heavenly, angelic trumpets. But the 90s, you know, it was still all about guitars. It was still all about two guitars, bass, and drums, basically. You know, Linkin Park hadn't come in and put a turntable in. There wasn't the rap rock revolution. That didn't happen until later. Rap metal fusion. That was like later in the 90s. So Edward Burns was there amongst all this and spinning his kind of melodramatic Irish tales of infidelity. And that was just, so the story went that he shot fucking Brothers McMullen. He just made, you know, I think he said something about he submitted it all over the place. He submitted his screenplay to all these people. He submitted the movie to all these different film festivals. They all fucking told him no. He got rejected by everybody. So he didn't even know if he was any good, to be honest, right? And then, so he worked at Entertainment Tonight. And this is one of those, like, you have to be there when lightning strikes moments. And this is one thing that I feel like never really happened in my life. Now that I'm 40 and kind of a middle-aged loser, is like that day of days where, like, you meet that person who's, like, going to change your life and who's going to sort of pluck you out of obscurity and shelter you and mentor you and kind of bring you into the God realm. You know, you need that moment. You know, you need John Hammond, or you need, you know, who are famous moments of that kind of happening. Whatever it is. So with Edward Burns, he worked on Entertainment Tonight. There was some interview. They were doing like a junket with Robert Redford, right? For Quiz Show. I think it was a junket for Quiz Show. And Edward Burns had a VHS tape of his movie, Brothers McMullen. And I think he said something about, it's basically an elevator pitch. You know, he rode the elevator with Robert Redford. He had like a couple minutes. He gave him his movie. I don't even know if he got to say a whole lot about it. He just said, hey, this is my movie. Can you check it out? Blah, blah, blah. Robert Redford watched this fucking movie and got him into Sundance, basically. Because Robert Redford started fucking Sundance. I mean, that's what it's named after, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, right? So he was smart about that. He just went to the top. The gatekeeper, right? And Robert Redford liked his movie. They showed it at Sundance and it fucking won Sundance, right? So he said basically his life changed overnight. Edward Burns went from being, you know, a guy who worked at Entertainment Tonight and who went to film school, had written a bunch of scripts that didn't get accepted anywhere, didn't get made, didn't get greenlit, didn't get any interest, nobody even liked them, to winning fucking Sundance. You know, and I think Miramax came in and offered to finance his next movie for like $25 million, right? So all of a sudden, boom, he's a overnight success. He's a big-time player. He's an indie film. I don't even know if that happens. I don't think there really is like a magic wand moment like that anymore. It's like everything is streaming. I guess you could go viral, but it's like, what's that going to set you up for? You know, it's like, what do you do with that? You you know, it was a different world. Reading about Edward, I think he went to Hunter College, and he talks about it. He moved to the city in the 80s, I think, to go to college. He said he could get an apartment in the West Village for like, you know, $400 a month or something. So if you watch his early movies, if you watch She's the One, it's like all over on Hudson, you know, those extreme Tortilla Flats, all Bank Street, Washington Street. I turned off the comments, by the way, because I'm only doing an hour. I got to go to work pretty soon. But I just wanted to get on and talk about Edward Burns films. And so he was like, you know, he lived in the fucking West Village. He worked for Entertainment Tonight. He saved up his money. He wrote scripts. You know, he said he fucking went to Robert McKee's story conference. And that changed his life about, you know, and his attitude towards screenwriting. He said 3-act structure really helped him, which I guess I can see that. But, you know, at the time, I think that was very in vogue. 3-act structure and all that shit. Or Robert McKee story conference. But, you know, we don't live in that world. You know, for me, that is how I kind of conceptualized how I would make it or whatever. You know, it was like, I will save my money, I'll make my own films like Edward Burns, and fucking Of course I was evolving with, like when YouTube came out, I was like, okay, I'll put my movies on YouTube. But one of the reasons why I stopped doing filmmaking, or I changed the way that I did it, was because it was so expensive. And applying for film festivals is fucking expensive. To submit your movie to a film festival is like $50 or something. And they're getting hundreds of films, and it's like, it's kind of like poetry where it's just a racket. It's like, they're charging you to enter some contest so you can feel like you're a poet, or get your work out there so it's real or something. But it's like, I just didn't have the money for that, So Edward Burns was like the model for like the no budget. And this is something I wanted to talk about, was just like how in our culture you see things that imitate other things or sort of copy other things, but there's like a little bit of a lag. So it comes out almost like it's something new, right? Like they were asking Edward Burns, like what was he trying to like, or what gave him the idea to just like make, his no budget movie. And he mentioned Robert Rodriguez, right? But one of the things he also mentioned was Hal Hartley, which I think is an obvious thing now if you think about it. Like Hal Hartley is somebody who I would say is sort of like, I don't know, like an highbrow Edward Burns in a way. He's like a Long Island guy. He moved to the city. He sort of does his own independent scripts that he wants to do. They're kind of literary minded. Like I said, Edward Burns is more like a Pete Hamill. He's sort of like an airplane read. His movies are almost like airplane novels. They're not necessarily like, some kind of super avant-garde, experimental. But I think, he works on his characters, and there is truth to like the way that he understands how people interact. And, his movies are about adult things, which, this is a point I brought up earlier, how that market for the independent films just like kind of disappeared, and they stopped kind of making movies like that. Like nobody really wants like a Woody Allen husbands and wives knockoff. Like they want more fucking Thor movies. They want Ragnarok or whatever. They want to expand the fucking Star Wars universe. So Edward Burns should he should be on, fucking The Mandalorian or something. I don't know. He has kind of a career where he shows up in shows and movies and stuff as just like an actor. That was another reason why I used him as sort of a role model, because he had this he's married to Christy Turlington and shit. Michaeline, who was in my early movies, kind of looked like Christy Turlington. So I'm like, oh, this is kind of like Edward Burns here. I'm like writing my own scripts. But he was also an actor. He's in other people's movies. In Saving Private Ryan, he's the only person who survives. They all fucking die. Spoiler alert. They all fucking die, including Tom Sizemore. Except Edward Burns. Edward Burns is such a badass, he survives. This is one reason why I'm talking about him, because nobody talks about this guy. And it's like maybe he is kind of mid. I guess his movies are kind of mid. I don't think that's like a legitimate, maybe he's not writing like Othello, but like his movies are, they're almost like comfort food. They're very watchable. They kind of go down easy. There's people behaving badly. Maybe he's not. The way he writes dialogue, I think his dialogue is funny, but like his interactions, I think, are not usually very truthful to the way that like men and women talk to each other and flirting or whatever. It's like, he's a tall, good-looking guy. It's probably a lot different for him. But he gets the job done. He still goes out. I mean, his movie Newlyweds, he shot on DSLRs in like 2010 or something, very early on. He was a very early adopter of DSLRs. And so I think, from that regard, he's worth studying and using as an influence, because he's always adapting. He uses these small crews. He shoots on the streets of New York in plain air. And he shot this movie on a DSLR in 2010 with like actors that he found on Craigslist who are good actors. So many movies, it's like, oh, we got to throw famous people in here or whatever. Like his movie before that, Groomsman, was pretty good. It's John Leguizamo and Matthew Lillard. Who the fuck else? Jay Moore. Frank Vincent plays Jennifer Aniston's dad, and she's the one. The great Frank Vincent. But yeah, the Newlyweds movie is just like people he found on fucking Craigslist and shit, and they're still great, you know? The Groomsman movie I thought was a great movie about like marriage, guys hanging out. They're bro movies in a lot of ways, but they're deeper than like Old School or something, you know? They're not like Frat Pack, but they're not like affected bourgeois, like doll house porn, like Wes Anderson movies. He's not, you know, his budgets aren't huge, so I think he limits the stories that he wants to tell to what he can shoot for a low price, but he also wants to tell these stories. He wants to tell stories about adults negotiating marriage, negotiating adulthood, the city, lives in the city. You know, he loves New York. He wants to capture New York. Sidewalks of New York has a lot of World Trade Center shots in it. Right before 9/11, I think that movie came out around 9/11. You know, it's like he's cop adjacent, firefighter. He's got that kind of blue collar Irish New York thing. And so, you know, I think that's a nice counterpoint. You know, Wes Anderson movies have become these big spectacle. They're almost like superhero movies in and of themselves. So it's all about the fucking costume and the fucking branding. You know, Edward Burns movies are naturalism. They're stripped down. They were kind of ahead of their time in that way. You know, he was ahead of this whole kind of like, everybody's a filmmaker, everything's naturalism, everything's reality, shooting on the streets. He was ahead of that. You know, he's like an Eric Romer, like I said, or like a Noah Baumbach, like a Nora Ephron. You know, like it's almost like light comedy. It's insightful. It's sort of romantic. It's sort of sentimental. It's got that Irish Ted Berrigan Irish line. It's got that sentimental Irish line. Guinness, you know, they're drinking Guinness. And County Cork and all that shit. But, you know, so I'm an Irish. There was not a whole lot of ethnic, you know, impounding on us as children, other than my grandma, who was like very insistent that we were super Irish. Her family, her maiden name is Collins. They're from Buffalo. They're like these Irish railroad lawyers. So we had a lot of pride in that for some reason. You know, I don't know. It's a link, like I said, with poetry, with New York. A lot of my favorite poets, who I sort of like, you know, follow the thread of Eileen Myles, Ted Berrigan, Frank O'Hara. They're Irish, Catholic, New York poets, right? There's something about that. James Joyce, right? Even the fucking Beatles are Irish, really. You know, they immigrated from Ireland into Liverpool. Their families, they were originally fucking Irish. It's a magical land. What else the hell did I... Oh yeah, so I wanted to talk about, yeah, so like, what I see, you know, people like that, that's how his career was born. He made these sort of independent films. I think once Sidewalks of New York bombed, I don't think Edward Norton, I don't know if he's ever had a huge budget. His movie, Summer Days and Summer Nights is kind of interesting. It was like a streaming, you know, I think he's gotten a few budgets for like streaming stuff. I haven't seen Everybody Wants Some, the Linklater movie, but it kind of feels like his version of that, or like, Dazed and Confused, which is really a remake of American Graffiti. Edward Burns said he was trying to make a movie like American Graffiti. And Summer Days, Summer Nights kind of feels more like, it feels like Dazed and Confused, where it's like, it's all these like, it's a coming of age movie, people right on the precipice of kind of adulthood, hot, they're all hot, they're driving around being hot. But Summer Days, Summer Nights takes place on Long Island. It's like he's a great Long Island filmmaker, you know, and I'm starting to get into that culture as well, right? So it's sort of fetishizing that for me. No Looking Back. Bon Jovi is in this fucking movie with Lauren Holly. And it's a great, like, beach town movie. You know, but he shot it in Rockaway, which is crazy to me. It's got this great, you know, when I was reading that book, you know, in college or whatever, I didn't know what Rockaway was. I thought it was like some crazy fucking small town in Jersey or something that he shot. I didn't realize, it's like Rockaway's on the fucking A train. You know, this movie acts like it's some bumfuck dead-end town in the middle of nowhere that they're all stuck in. It's like, just get on the fucking A train, go to the city. It's like, I practically live that far away from Manhattan now, you know? And so, Summer Days, Summer Nights is almost like a spiritual, sequel, where it's like, it's kind of the same vibe, Long Island, beach town, trying to get the most out of summer. You know, it's a hackneyed metaphor, I guess, for youth, high school. But that's what American Graffiti is, right? They're all about to go to college. It's like literally like the last days before they're going to go to college, in possibly Vietnam. Vietnam is just starting, and so there's going to be a loss of innocence, right? And so they're cruising around in all their fucking hot rods and shit. It's the early 60s, before the Beatles, before the British invasion, before Kennedy got shot. I think it's like right before Kennedy got shot. Summer Days, Summer Nights doesn't have quite the same weight, per se, but, you know, he does nice stuff with music. You can tell he's like into the soundtracks. He's not, you know, he's not like some aesthetic fuckboy like Wes Anderson or something. He's not like Mr., you know, Tumblr mood board. He's kind of a basic guy, you know. Edward Burns is kind of a guy's guy, you know. He's kind of a man's man. He's a guy's guy to being a man's man. It's like, you know, he cast Dennis Farina. Dennis Farina is in Sidewalks of New York and Newlyweds, I think. One of my favorite actors, Dennis Farina, who was a cop. He was actually a cop. He's like a Chicago. But he's got an accent. He's got that kind of New York, hard-nosed, street-smart Popeye Doyle thing going on. I think Edward Burns, you know, is kind of curious and, you know, male, I would say this is like, these are like healthy masculinity. Like Edward Burns, he's an example of like a healthy masculinity, I would say. His movies are pretty chaste, considering they're all about love and kind of like, you know, infidelity in a way, or sex, or, you know, flirtation. There's really no sex scenes at all. There's no nudity. There's not even really kissing or anything. They're very, you know, so they're Irish Catholic in that way too, you know. They're kind of like choir boy, altar boy kind of movies or something. And, yeah, I don't know. 9/11, I think, was a part of the big change where, like, everything was digital. It became this kind of surveillance state. Everything became about data, analytics, you know, spreadsheets, you know, the kind of physical paper office world of downtown kind of just got knocked out of existence. And we moved, you know, it was kind of the beginning of the move into remote work, you know, commercial real estate dying. And I think you can feel that change in the culture where it's like, with film, suddenly you went from celluloid, from actual films, from videotapes, from film festivals that really matter, from gatekeepers like Robert Redford, to, you know, like I said, David Chase wanted The Sopranos to be a fucking indie film, you know, or Matt Weiner, I think, you know, I think he made an indie film, like in the 90s, before Mad Men, before, you know, if you look at a lot of the influences on The Sopranos, it's like Trees Lounge, Goodfellas, obviously, Spike Lee films, like Michael Imperioli worked with Spike Lee on a bunch of movies, you know, so you know, David Chase used a lot of those actors, used a lot of those kind of like indie film cool actors from the 90s. John Fintamiglia is in a bunch of indie films. He was in one of the Edward Burns films, I forget which one. He plays like a fucking cook. He's always playing a cook. Turturro, not John, but Ada Turturro. Imperioli, of course, right, was in a lot of indie films. Son of Sam. That movie about Andy Warhol. I Shot Andy Warhol. Imperioli plays Ondine in that. So, you really see the independent film industry die, and it sort of becomes prestige television. Whatever, kind of literary, I think, aspirations suddenly went into these big, fleshed out, long form narrative TV shows, the budgets, the spirit. When Napster pirating became like the thing, the independent film market basically died with streaming. So they couldn't really there was no market. They couldn't sell DVDs of fucking Kevin Smith movies or Edward Burns movies. It's like you could just watch them for free on the internet. And so all those guys migrated to fucking TV shows. Edward Burns had some show about the 60s, being a cop in New York in the 60s. And so where does that leave us now? In a certain way, it's like there's just so much cultural noise that it feels like even if you make a film, it's like, how do you get it onto streaming? How do you get people to see it? How do you get money for it? Even Hollywood can't figure out how to make any fucking money from what they're doing. And then the AI thing, right, is a whole other fucking question, where it's like, is that just going to be, are we just going to dream movies? Like Harmony Korine says. But it's, it's just a migration of kind of everything from physical, media to servers, data, the cloud, metadata, just breaking it down into information to model stuff on, data centers. It's all just ones and zeros now. All right, I'm about to sign off. I'm going to do 60 minutes and I'm going to be done. But thank you for watching. This is just a little mini episode. Come to Book City this Saturday. I curated some Book City. We got some great readers Saturday at Block Hill Station. I'm working the next 3 days. I'm shooting Poets Theater. Next Monday's our 2-year anniversary at Easy Paradise. Come out and be a part of the fun. Although I've alienated everybody, I'm not getting any support. I'm getting no likes. No one is happy for me. It's hard to run a business. It's hard to be a boss, It's a messy process, and I am doing the best that I can. It's dramatic, like Jim Belushi. I like the juice. I take things seriously. I think if you're not risking your life for poetry, you don't deserve success. These people who have MFAs, these people who are professors, they're not risking their life. They're not in any danger. They're not putting it on the line. They're very safe. They're coddled. They're taken care of. They can afford to pay their rent. They can afford to go to the doctor. They can afford, to travel. It's like me, it's like we're living without a net, I think you got to risk your life for whatever it is that you do, or else it's not real, To me, it's got to be real. That's the ride of life. It's making it matter, making it meaningful, doing the right thing, doing what you believe in, and treat others how you want to be treated, which is what I do generally. I try to help people. I try to boost people. I try to get people moving. I try to support people, compliment people. Maybe people take that as disingenuous. I don't know. What's the harm in being positive and being supportive? And I do believe in a lot of people. I think there are a lot of talented people. If I don't like somebody, they probably do know it. Because there's a lot of people whose work I do not like. And that, coupled with my own personal living circumstances, causes huge gaps between me. You know, it's like I'm trapped in this red room every Monday. People feel like that's the only place I exist. You know, space has grown between me and most everybody else. You know, part of that is ego. You know, I definitely have a huge ego, and I definitely have a certain way that I want to be perceived, and it's like if I don't reach that, a lot of times I can feel like, well, fuck this person then. This person doesn't want to publish me. This person isn't knocked out by what I do. They don't see the point of what I do. They're not impressed. Fuck them. They don't know shit. They're lame. Their taste sucks. Their poetry sucks. They're bad at writing. To be honest, I mean, there's not that many people. You know, it's like in that Basquiat movie. You know, Gary Oldman plays the Julian Schnabel kind of painter guy. And he says to Basquiat, Jeffrey Wright, he says, there's only, a handful of people in the world who know anything about painting, right? And Andy Warhol's one of them. And Andy likes Basquiat. That's how poetry is. You know, there's only a handful of people in the world. Maybe not a handful. It's more than a handful, but you know, I try to be open and support everything except stuff that I feel like gets a lot of validation that I don't think deserves it. That usually when I get jealous and when I get when I throw shade at people, you know, is when I feel like they're getting too much attention that they don't deserve. Which often is the case in poetry. People want to hear sentimental claptrap. I mean, your reputation does matter, and the people business, we're all in the people business. Your relationships with people are like the most important thing you have. And so that's a lesson that's hard to learn, but it's like, you know, it's like fucking having a garden. You know, it's like there's periods of drought. There's periods, you know, where you lose the crop. There's periods where you overwater the fucking plants, where you're not giving them enough attention. You know, you gotta tend to your fucking garden. And my garden is a shitload of human relationships. And was the open mic just the best way to get every fucking entertainer in New York to hate me? Is it a great way to just alienate yourself from every aspiring? What are we trying to do here? You know, is part of what I'm talking about. Like making an independent film, doing shows in New York. It's like, what is the point of this? It doesn't feel like there's a clear, you know, like in the 90s, reading that book, that Edward Burns book, it felt like this is how you do it. You shoot a film, you write a script, you keep writing scripts, you get actors, you shoot a fucking film with the locations, and bam, if it's good, you'll get discovered. Now it's like, Jesus Christ. Everyone has a fucking podcast microphone. Everyone is making Instagram reels or whatever the fuck. How do you cut through the noise? And why even come to New York and do shows? You know, it's like they won't, an agent, a manager, a label, whatever it is, they will not sign you unless you have a 50,000 followers. You know, they want to see that you are resonating with people. Everything is IP now, right? Everything is just like, we want to know that this works before we invest in it. It's not Robert Redford saw your fucking movie and he believes in it. And so now you're a fucking star, kid, because this guy's the Sundance Kid.
We're supposed to get that sold out.
It's like, well, you know, you got 1 million views on your fucking reels and you got all these followers and shit, but there's no industry. Why did I start talking about that? Well, I don't know. You know, with these open mics, it's like you see all these people come to New York, do shows. You know, I guess the idea for me, and this is something I'm questioning with myself. It's like, why have I spent the last decade doing this? Because it seems to me that what you really need is a product that works every fucking time. If you're a filmmaker, if you're a songwriter, whatever, poet, painter, what our culture wants, the market demand, you know, you have to economize whatever your art is now. And so with a movie, you have to have a machine that gives somebody a feeling they want every fucking time. And so they buy it and they spend time with it and they want to be, your song has to do that. Your song has to make people feel something. It has to make people go, fuck, that's good. Like that song, Girls, The Dare. There's a reason why that guy's blowing up, because this song is catchy as hell. And it is flattering to women. You know, so they can listen to it. The lyrics are smart. They're funny. They're clever. It's like, the guy made a song that people want to fucking hear. They go on Spotify, they click it, because it gives them a little pellet of happiness. And as artists, that's the fucking, what we're cornered into doing now. It's like, you got to give people a little nugget of fucking happiness, or else you will never get a living. You'll never get signed. You'll never get anything. And I saw an interesting video, Charlie Kaufman, talking about what is the point of what we do. And he was like, one of the interesting things he said was, the audience is programmed now. What they're programmed to like. And our job is not to make things that people like. Our job is to reflect life and to tell the truth. And it's hard to see that sometimes. You know, a lot of times shit that's way ahead of everybody else does not get recognized. That's what I'm banking on. I'm banking on the Emily Dickinson effect. 50 years after I die, people will be like, Jesus Christ, this guy's a genius. This is the Edward Byrne lecture. Have you watched this? You know, whereas like we are forced into this market, everything, movies, music, all of our art now is like, you either get a huge audience or people think you're just a loser. Or like, you know, they're not impressed. You know, like you have to wield this kind of huge celebrity fucking power, which is just IP brand recognizability, you know? People want to pay to see something that's famous. They want to be near something famous. They want to see a celebrity. They want to get their picture taken with a celebrity. They want, you know, clout. They want a blurb from a celebrity, vindication from a celebrity. They want Robert Redford to pick their movie. You know, that's what we think God is. That's what we think is like, that's larger than life, that stuff. Music, movies, they all give us a feeling that's like, indicates to us there is something greater. You know, like movies, music, this is like where we visit heaven temporarily. Art is like where we get to go to heaven for like a few minutes. But only a part of us. You know, we're still in our body, we're still in pain, we still have obligations, and we gotta feed ourselves and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, our ears or our mind get to like take a little vacation. And I don't know. As somebody who's, you know, I've got 3 people watching, thank you guys for watching. My work has never resonated with a lot of people. And I blame them. I blame people. It's not me, it's you guys. Well, not you guys, but it's the other you guys who are not watching. It's the people who aren't watching. It's their fault. They're too dumb. They don't get me. They don't understand my fucking poetry is too deep. Alright, well anyway, is that all I need to say? There's so much more to talk about. I think I'm going to get back on tomorrow. Yeah, so what, like doing these open mics, like what is the point of this? Where is this going to go? If you don't have 50,000 followers, where is this going to go? Like, that is what matters now. Building an online audience. So for me, it's like the last 10 years, I've really prioritized in-person shows. I don't know what I was thinking. I just thought, you know, I came from the school. David Mamet said, do it for 10 years in front of an audience. The audience will tell you what's good. The audience tells you what works.
and you'll get better. Just do it for 10 years in front of an audience. So Louis C.K. says, that's what they all say. Do it for 10 years. Do it for 10 years. But you have to do it in front of an audience, right? And then what happens? You know, like, unless you're Matt Rife and your videos are fucking going viral on the internet, being in front of an audience doesn't even matter. The audience is decided by the internet now, not the other way around. You know, it's not like you're gonna get discovered in some club and all of a sudden people are gonna be like, oh my God, this guy's fucking great. You know, now you're famous. It's like you're gonna have some video that goes viral, 1 million people see it, and all of a sudden you can do fucking a tour, you know? And so for me, it's like I'm sort of trying to learn something that's like obsolete, where it's like I wanted to learn how to be a live performer. You know, I wanted to learn how to do that. If I make like a product, I'd say it's that. You know, it's like that's what I've worked on, that's what I've rehearsed, that's what I spent my time doing. I think that's why other people go to open mics. I think that's why comedians go, because they want to get better as live performers. And it's like, I don't necessarily know that that's like, I mean, it is a valuable skill, but it's not as valuable of a skill as like, you know, being a celebrity is like the corporatization of fame. You know, like culture is local. You know, like entertainers are local. Poetry is local. Art is local. But we're small businesses, right? As open micers, as poets, as comedians, whatever. We are like mom and pop, you know? But we live in a culture where the only thing that people give a fuck about, and all of the rules are designed to help bolster the huge brand names. Things like Starbucks, things like McDonald's, things like Chipotle, things like Lowe's, things like Walmart, Target. There's a fucking Target on 23rd Street where I used to live. 23rd and 8th Avenue, there's a Target now. It just gets worse and worse for me. I never should have moved out of that apartment. They should have made them evict me. But
I know, and I didn't. And
my life would be a lot different right now. But the Lord has a plan. You know, we just have to go with the Lord's plan and trust that they know what they're talking about. God is they, them, by the way. I don't know if that's really been clarified. I think that the Pope should come out. The Pope seems pretty woke. Francis, can we get, like, can you come out and just say something about how God is they, them? God is they, them pronouns, okay? God is all pronouns. Yeah, so it's like I feel like I've been trying to learn how to be a good live performer, but it's like you got to buy stage time. You know, in New York, the industry is like they're selling you on the dream. You got to pay $5 every time you want 5 minutes to practice. But it's like it doesn't connect anymore. You know, it's like New York, it's a great, there are a lot of stages, but it's like the audience here, I don't know. I guess they're savvy. There is a big audience because there's a lot of people. Like, it's a great place to do shows and do a lot of shows and do the circuit of open mics and hone your craft in that way. But it's like, you know, if you can make one fucking video or one fucking recording like Girls by The Dare, that multiplies your effect by millions, you know? Elvis knew that before anybody. People give the Beatles credit for like stopping touring, but Elvis stopped touring before anybody. Elvis didn't play any shows hardly at all after like 1950, after he got drafted, really. Like after 1956, Elvis didn't really play that many concerts until like 1970. He played a few in like 1960 when he got back from the army, but like he made his movies, right? And people love to hate on Elvis's movies, and I have not really seen Elvis's movies, to be honest. They probably are shitty, but they were a way of him going on tour before he could go on tour, and it was a music video before there was music videos. It was a way to give everybody a live Elvis performance that they charged money for. You had to pay to see it. You had to go to a theater, and so it was bigger. It was spectacle. But it was like you'd get to hear all the new Elvis songs. You get to hear and see the guy dance and shit. They did that instead of sending him everywhere. And those Elvis songs from the 60s are some of the most beautiful music ever made. People love to shit on Elvis's movies, but to me, probably his best music is the music from the 60s. I love the 50s, I love the 70s, but the music that he made for those movies has a lot of magic in it, and a very romantic, beautiful kind of sound. That the 50s are more edgy, the 70s are more kind of like gaudy and over, kind of blown. But this guy right here. So anyway, I'm gonna get off now. But thank you for watching. I still think there's magic and value in live performance, obviously, right? But especially in a small club, I think small clubs are the way that things are kind of meant to be seen. We live in this arena rock culture, where if you're not fucking Taylor Swift, like, you're just like an insect. You're just an ant. But I don't know. We do matter. Our voices matter. Pay more attention to the local. Pay more attention to your friends. You know, block the celebrities. Just block them. Block them on social media. Block Travis Kelce. I did. I don't ever want to hear anything about fucking Travis Kelce again. The dude is super ugly and gross. That's all I'll say about that. All right, well, thank you for watching. I'll be back on tomorrow. Like and subscribe. And come to Boog City. Also, reading at Spoonbill Saturday the 28th. Spoonbill with Ashley and other illustrious clout monsters. Finally getting that bookstore clout. It's all bullshit. It's all fucking bullshit. I love open mics. Open mics are where the real motherfuckers are. The people who do it for love of the game. They're not prostitutes like these other fucking fakes. The celebrity poets can blow me. They can suck me fucking sideways. Alright, thank you for watching.